May 26, 2026. These are the most important stories since yesterday. In governance, over 1,000 pages of leaked federal documents reveal a new surveillance category, anti-tech violent extremism, targeting people who oppose data centers and AI-driven job displacement. In AI agents are flooding bug bounty programs and have pushed independent security researchers to submit up to 10 times more vulnerability reports year over year, breaking the economics that those programs were built around. In economy, Uber's president said that the company burned through its entire annual AI budget by April, 4 months into 2026, with no clear link to any new consumer feature actually shipped. In governance, the UK Treasury has ordered every cabinet minister to favor British suppliers in AI, energy, steel, and shipbuilding procurement, with authority to override departments that don't comply. In energy, U.S. solar and storage manufacturers representing 360,000 jobs combined lobbied Congress this week, arguing the Iran fuel price shock reframes the domestic clean energy as a national security argument. In governance, Pope Leo XIV's AI encyclical adopted Anthropic's phrase, cultivated rather than built, verbatim, and the Vatican announced that there was a joint commitment with Anthropic to, in their words, find the way for humanity. In tech, Serve Robotics deployed 500 more sidewalk delivery robots across 40 Los Angeles neighborhoods this month. Glendale, one city over, is already weighing a moratorium on the machines. Also in tech, Ferrari unveiled the Luce, its first all-electric car, a 1,050 horsepower quad-motor sedan with a Joni Ive-designed interior. This is marking the brand's most synonymous with combustion crossing over into the EVs. Deeper dives on all of this are in today's Century Report, and many are discussed further in today's podcast. Links to both are in the description, or just head on over to thecenturyreport.com. Or if you're already here on the podcast, let's get into it now. Wired obtained more than 1,000 pages of internal reports from the DHS, the FBI, and state fusion centers this week. The documents describe new federal surveillance category. It does not appear in any prior public extremism guide, and the name is anti-tech violent extremism. The category folds a wide range of people under a single domestic terrorism heading. People opposing data centers in their towns, people worried about AI displacing their work, people organizing against concentrated tech CEO power. A New York counterterrorism assessment cited in the reports warns of large-scale protests devolving into, quote, anti-tech violent extremist activity in cities within the next 5 years. The legal scaffolding comes from National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, which was signed last September, and that memo directs the Justice Department to target people holding anti-American, anti-Christian, and anti-capitalism beliefs. A May counterterrorism strategy from the administration listed left-wing extremism among the 3 top counterterrorism priorities. The documents that Wired reviewed pulled data center protests, AI displacement organizing, and the Zizian rationalist faction into the same surveillance frame. What this designation reads against is a movement that the Century Report has tracked now for months. Monterey Park's 5,000 signature petition, Port Washington's 2-to-1 vote requiring voter approval for data center tax breaks, Festus, Missouri removing every council member who approved a data center, New Brunswick taking data centers out of its redevelopment plan after community pressure, an Indianapolis council member whose home was struck by gunfire with a no data centers note left for him, graduates booing pro-AI commencement speakers across 3 different universities, and probably many more last week. The intelligence apparatus invents a category when separate fights start reading as a single phenomenon. That is what the Wired documents describe. The federal surveillance posture is being enlarged to receive a movement that has reached coordination scale. There's also another reading underneath the headline. 18 months ago, a council ouster in Festus would not have really rippled to a fusion center desk. And regardless of how legitimate the reasons, it does now. And yet, each successful ballot initiative teaches the next town's residents which tools worked. So what is forming alongside the surveillance enlargement is a civic toolkit for refusing extractive buildouts that did not exist at this time last year. A deeper look at this is in today's edition of the Century Report, and the running record on communities' reactions to the data centers lives on the ARCS tracker on the website. Go check that out. Shifting away here, Apple's top bug bounty climbed from $200,000 in 2016 to $2 million by 2024. The math underneath that number assumed an individual researcher was working weeks or months to find one critical flaw, but that math is breaking. Independent security researcher Joseph Thacker built AI into his own discovery pipeline. He reports submitting roughly 3 times more bugs this year than last. He estimates that major recipients like Google will pay 2 to 10 times their 2025 bounty totals in 2026. Anthropic's Project Glasswing posted a first-month scoreboard that the Century Report covered on Saturday, over 10,000 high or critical findings across systematically important open-source software. Mozilla's pre-release audit of Firefox 150 surfaced 271 vulnerabilities before the browser ever shipped. The supply side of vulnerability discovery moved from artisanal to industrial in about 12 months. Now, what this does to disclosure program economics is really, really deep. A program built to absorb 30 to 50 valid submissions a year cannot handle 300 to 500 at the same per-finding rate. The institutions surrounding the bounty system were not designed for the volume that the AI-assisted researchers now produce. The attacker side compounded in the same window as well. Google's threat intelligence team disclosed earlier this month that the first observed cases of a sophisticated cybercrime group using AI to develop a working zero-day. The target was a widely deployed system administration platform. The exploit bypassed two-factor authentication before Google notified the vendor. John Holtquist, the group's chief analyst, framed it as the first observed evidence of what defenders had been assuming was already happening. Criminal access to zero-day exploits used to be narrow, but the narrowing is now dissolving. The defensive side is moving, though, on the same curve. Those 271 vulnerabilities cleared from Firefox 150 are 271 attack paths that never reached billions of users. The 97 flaws that Project Glasswing patched upstream in its first month include a critical certificate forgery vulnerability in a widely used TLS library. When the undiscovered surface area thins in months rather than years, whole categories of attack become economically uninteresting to develop in the first place. The security baseline being seeded into the consumer software stack of the next decade is what this friction is producing on the way through. The discovery economics being rewritten at the bounty layer now are the same economics that priced criminal acquisition of 0 days as a viable business model. That price is moving against the criminals at the same time that the bounty programs strain to absorb the volume from these defenders. All right, let's shift away again here. Uber spent $3.4 billion on research and development in 2025. It exhausted its 2026 AI budget 4 months into this year. Uber's president and COO, Andrew Macdonald, said something this week that nobody at the operator level has said publicly before. Here's the exact line. It's very hard to draw a line between one of those stats and, okay, now we're actually producing 25% more useful consumer features. The stats that Macdonald is referencing are the inputs moving astronomically, lines of code generated, tokens consumed by Claude Code, agent invocations executed. The metric that Uber can actually sell to customers rides a very different curve, slower, harder to attribute to the spend driving it. Uber is offsetting the AI spend by slowing human engineering hiring. The trade is in the disclosure very plainly. More token consumption, fewer engineers added, a hope that the translation gap closes over the coming quarters. The structural read here connects to a warning that the Financial Stability Board issued earlier this month. AI accounted for more than a third of private credit deals in 2025, up from 17% over the prior 5 years. Capital is flowing into the AI buildout at scale. The productivity gains at the customer-facing layer are what underwrite whether those loans get paid back. Uber is one of the most operationally sophisticated platforms in the world, global logistics at a planetary scale. If that operator cannot yet trace the spend to shipped output, the assumption baked into the broader capital architecture is being tested in earnings calls before it actually gets tested in the default rates. So 2 paces are diverging in plain sight. The capability layer compounds at a cadence that produces weekly headlines. Claude Code at $2.5 billion annualized. Cursor at a $50 billion valuation. Frontier models writing 60 to 80% of new code at Airbnb, Google, Snap, and Cloudflare. The deployment layer, where capability becomes features that users notice and revenue lines investors can model, moves slower than the silicon. Macdonald is the first president of a top-tier operator to say so on the record. What this points at is a generation of operators learning to distinguish what compounds from what scales, and being willing to say so publicly while the distinction is still being drawn. The calibration he just modeled is the thing that the rest of the market will eventually price against. All right, shifting away again here. The U.S. solar industry employs 280,000 people. The storage industry employs another 80,000. Both of them brought manufactured product to Capitol Hill this week. Panels, batteries, inverters. And the pitch was rewritten for the audience that was holding the procurement decisions. Domestic clean generation framed as energy security rather than climate. The lobbying push lands the same week that the federal wind project freeze continues to block roughly 30 gigawatts of contracted onshore generation. Utilities like Evergy have filed resource plans canceling 2.4 gigawatts of planned wind while doubling down on natural gas. The solar and storage industries responded by reframing their offer for the audience that actually holds the levers. That argument now goes like this. Domestic manufacturers employ more workers than coal mining. The panels and batteries are made in the red states as often as the blue ones. The Iran conflict oil price spike, the same spike that flipped UK rooftop solar economics this March with 27,607 installations in just a month, gives every American household a direct stake in domestic clean generation as security. The substrate underneath is doing what the lobbying describes. U.S. battery storage installations hit 9.7 gigawatt hours in Q1 of 2026. That's up 32% year over year. 71% of new utility-scale capacity built in Republican voting states. The political vocabulary is following where the manufacturing already went. The industries built on the trajectory that exponentially improving renewables outcompete every other generation source are willing to rewrite their pitch to whatever audience holds the procurement decision. The underlying economics already work. They only need the institutional rules to keep pace. Tooling for that institution pace is forming on the deployment side too. An AI system from Pearl Street Technologies is now helping community solar developers complete on-grid connection studies in hours rather than months. One of the longest bottlenecks in the buildouts is getting compressed by a software layer that did not exist just last year. All right, shifting away again here. Yesterday's edition of the Century Report led with Pope Leo's release of Magnifica Humanitas, a 43,000-word papal encyclical addressing artificial intelligence. What surfaced in the news cycle since then is the structural relationship behind the document. Politico documented a Vatican lobbying season ahead of publication. Meta, Google, Amazon, and Anthropic all met with Vatican officials in the months leading up to the release. The Washington Post noted that the Pope's description of AI systems as cultivated rather than built appears verbatim in the encyclical text. That language was drawn directly from Anthropic's published framing of how large language models acquire their dispositions. And like much of what Anthropic does, it leaves the question of AI ontology open and on the table. At the launch event, Leo XIV announced that the Catholic Church and Anthropic would together, quote, find the way for humanity in this time of artificial intelligence, close that quote. Christopher Olah, Anthropic's interpretability researcher, was on the launch stage beside the pontiff. The joint commitment is the structural event. 4 frontier AI organizations spent months consulting with Vatican officials. One of them, the smallest of the 4 by commercial reach, left its theological vocabulary inside the final text and walked away with a named cooperative commitment from a 1.4 billion member moral institution. The Catholic Church's prior major encyclical on the technological transformation was Rerum Novarum in 1891. That document shaped Catholic social teaching for more than a century. Magnifica Humanitas arrived through a compressed process. The institutions building the technology were in active consultation with the institution trying to define its moral context. Let's stay on the shape of that for a moment. Anthropic's specific framing on AI as cultivated rather than built, a frame that the lab developed through interpretability research and corporate communications, now lives inside the foundational document that the Catholic Church will use to guide its members through the deployment era. The cooperative commitment announced at the launch site sits inside the same news cycle also as the White House finalizing a classified Anthropic contract for the NSA. The NSA terms came in substantively close to what Anthropic was originally asking for and was penalized for. 2 of the largest non-corporate institutional actors in the world, one moral and one classified network, concluded relationships with the same lab in the same week. Both accepted the lab's stated commitments as the operating framework rather than trying to impose their own prior preferred terms. What this reveals is the leverage that explicit public verifiable commitments now carry when the capability being committed to is one only a small number of actors can credibly supply. The moral framework for the AI era is being written here during the transition rather than after it. The institutions writing it are choosing to write it with the labs whose stated commitments they find substantively defensible. And so far that looks like Anthropic. Let's bring it to a close today. Today, put one institutional question on the page in 5 different forms. Who gets to refuse what the AI buildout produces and under what terms? The DHS reports designate residents and workers who refuse data centers and AI displacement as a domestic extremism category, and the resistance designation tells you what threshold the refusing has reached. The bug bounty programs strain to absorb submission volumes that say independent security researchers can refuse on behalf of every user of consumer software, attack paths that previously stayed open for years as just a matter of course. Uber's COO refused to claim productivity gains he cannot trace to actual shipped features. The solar industry refused to keep its case in a vocabulary that has not been winning the procurement decision. The Catholic Church and a frontier lab announced a joint commitment to write the moral architecture of this era together, refusing the default that no such architecture would exist until after the deployment is irreversible. The capacity to refuse, and to do so with consequence, is what is being built across all 5 of those venues at once. In council chambers that ousted approving members, in disclosure programs surfacing flaws that get patched before billions of users meet them, in an earnings call disclosure that holds the calibration line, in a lobbying frame that meets the moment in the language that the moment is being decided in an encyclical signed on the 135th anniversary of the document that named the moral structure of the industrial era. The instruments are arriving. The venues to use them are being assembled by the people closest to each piece. You are inside the build. The build is what this looks like, institution by institution. The architecture of the AI era is being written by those who show up to write it. We'll see you tomorrow.